Good evening, everybody. I think Kashif is there and he's joining us.
Hey
Yes,
everybody.
there he is in the flesh. I heard
Yes.
you talking about this the other day, by the way, on your Instagram and toilet paper. That was the
Yeah.
first thing that came up. Of course, tonight we're talking about forever chemicals, understanding them, what to do about them, how to clear them out of our system, which is a challenge in and of itself. But what were you talking about when it came to
Well,
toilet
it's
paper?
funny because when we were at that biohacking conference like a year ago or something, we were both there, right? A guy walked by and said, "Hey, toilet paper guy." I was like, "What is he talking about?" "You're the toilet paper guy." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You're the guy that's talking about," and I realized what he was talking about. And he said that he went and bought a bidet. There's a company called Tushy that sells these bidets that you build right into your toilet. Because what we said was that the processing that it requires to get that toilet paper into the context, that format that's sitting on your roll, exposes it to forever chemicals. So what is a forever chemical? It's in the name. It doesn't break down. Passes through your body, continues to be as active as day one, goes into our drainage, our water, enters somebody else's body from some other way, and is still as active as it ever was. So it's forever. And until it's out of your body, causing damage. So where we're now at is right down in the toilet paper. It's so prolific and everywhere that we we need to understand where these chemicals reside, where the sort of their flow, and where our exposures are because of the nature of them being that forever, right? It's not something your body breaks down. They just sit there and cause damage.
Nearly indestructible. They're ubiquitous, or in other words, everywhere, like you said, the water, air, the
Yeah.
products we use daily, including obviously the toilet paper you were talking about, to nonstick cookware and cosmetics as well. In fact, we've asked folks, continue to answer as you coming through, everybody. But what do you think is the most toxic thing in your household? And so we're going to take that poll up in a second. We asked whether it was plastic storage. Long heard about the BPA, bisphenol A, and there's other plastics obviously being replaced by those. That's industry for you. PFAS, that's one of the forever chemicals. Fragrances, phthalates, or triclosan. So we'll talk about that. But for me, Cash, of what makes PFASs or per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. But from now on, let's just call them PFASs or PFASs. That'll save a lot of time. Is not just their omnipresence, but as you described it already, the ability really to persist in our body and not just the environment indefinitely. So this leads to serious health risks. So we're talking about immune dysfunction. We're talking about hormone or like endocrine dysfunction, and even the big C, right?
Yeah.
Cancer. So we're going to talk about the science behind these toxic substances, explore their impact on our health, and of course, most importantly, show you how to protect yourself, where they're found in your home, and how to protect your loved ones from this basically invisible threat. So understanding forever chemicals, that's the nature. And this is probably going to lead to a part two, because inevitably this is just, there's so much to talk about. And we want to get questions answered tonight as well. But so people are answering, and so far it looks like BPA is winning. Would you think or argue perhaps that that has something to do with education, how we've been told a lot about the
You
BPA?
literally just read my mind. That's exactly what I was thinking is BPA is the thing of, say, a decade ago that we first learned of, that we got exposed to, that we learned to eliminate. The other things we're now learning about, right? So, for example, um, what's happening in that Teflon coated frying pan, right? And this is the thing when this poll was developed, your answer was number one on the list is that pan.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So if you scratch the pan, which you typically do, and you're cooking on that pan, you're getting millions and millions of microplastics and forever chemical particles into your food.
Yep.
And it is the one thing that is probably causing the most hormonal damage, cellular damage in terms of what's in your home, right? And in as much as you see claims as this one is safe and this one is not, they're not, right? So you need to get them out. There's in terms of what Bryce was just saying about these things not leaving the body, it's not just the environment, it's the body. There was this study, I think it was out of France, where they were taking breast cancer patients, right? And what they don't often do is analyze the tumor beyond the genetics of the tumor, because they're trying to analyze the tumor in the context of what drug is relevant, what treatment is relevant. They're never asking why did this happen? So there was some research done in terms of why did this happen? And they started to look at beyond the tumor itself, what else resided there. And they found in 90% plus of the women, phthalates and forever chemicals in and amongst the tumor, either in it or right next to it, in that sort of barrier and a border right next to it. So that speaks massive volumes in terms of what caused things. Right.
Absolutely. Well, and here it is, the ranking, as you've given away at least number one, and we're alluding to it. PFASs, forever chemicals. That's number one on this poll, actually ranked second. But folks are going to learn that's of course due to the persistence and severe health effects. The phthalates will probably be number two, and that's due to widespread exposure, endocrine disruption, also cancer causing. So says the scientific literature. Triclosan would probably be three. Again, it's hormone disruption and environmental impact. And then actually BPA coming in last. So there you have it, folks. That's really because it's less persistent. Our bodies at least know what to do about it. And of course, it's less of a toxic burden because we've acted on it. Because there have been lobbying for years now, of course, to make this change. So what we got to do about forever chemicals. And we're going to talk about this in detail. You're going to give some of your insights, obviously, but the discussion on this resilience in the environment, their bioaccumulation on us, and these associated health risks. So we're seeing things like increased cholesterol. We talked about cancer, thyroid disease, immune impairment. Give us a bit of a history, though, please, about like what you know about how and why this even began to be a chemical that has become now ubiquitous around the world. Where did this start?
So in and around the 1970s, well, from the 1970s to now, majority was in the 70s and 80s. We had 144,000 chemicals added to humanity. So prior to that, very different reality we lived in. The questions around production of product weren't so much about quality, nutrition, resilience, and longevity. They were more about shelf life, profitability, and cost. And so the questions around how do you make products also change. So the needs of these chemicals, in terms of shelf life, how do you make something last, for example, right? So we know this from the supplement business. When people look at expiry dates in like 2 years, you chuck it out. That's typically what happens, right? So the other day, my kids were on YouTube, and YouTube is really good at creating very powerful visuals while someone's talking to make sure you don't leave because the visuals are so appealing. And one of them is people cleaning carpets, right? So there's putting soap on it, foaming it up. There's a big motorized brush that's brushing it all up. And I'm like, why are you guys washing the carpets? And I realized they were listening to the thing, but the carpets were just keeping them engaged. And when I watched how much effort and how many substances were used in those multiple steps of cleaning that carpet, because this video 1 hour process was condensed into 30 seconds. My first thought is, where does all that stuff go? It's all going down the drain. And those chemicals are forever. So where do they end up? Where does the drain go? Back to our water supplies, back into agriculture, back into your tap, right? So there's some level of filtration, but certain molecules get past those membranes, the filters, and still continue on the road into the next phase of life. And you have, for example, major lawsuits right now where Johnson & Johnson is being sued around fire retardants and what firefighters are using. So imagine the amount of foam and firefighting foam that's being used. Where does it go? It all goes into the drains, right? So the next step, the consideration is shelf life, profitability, and of course, there's some levels of if it's food, addiction, flavor, those types of things. But where does it go is not the concern of the manufacturers. That's not part of the decision making in terms of is this safe or not, right?
Right.
Is it safe or not in the context of use, but not what happens next. And do that from the 1970s to now, where all these things are forever. They're not only forever, they are everywhere because you're not only exposed to what's being used today, where you're exposed to what has always been used and just hasn't gone away because it's forever.
You mentioned the fire retardant factor, and of course the fire foam spray that fire people use. This is the cohort of my patients that I have in clinical practice that are the highest toxic load carriers. We're going to tell everyone tonight too about how to properly get tested, not just for the level, because everyone's got them. I shockingly do as well. as much as I'm vigilant, because that just sort of speaks volumes to how persistent they are and cumulative they are, um, and how genetics play a role, which is a very interesting thing. But if we're going to point fingers at anybody and sort of add blame to industry, which all roads lead to Rome in this case.
Yeah.
Some of the headlines that have caught my attention in the last few years, but certainly more recently, it would be DuPont and 3M.
Yeah.
Uh, and just a couple of weeks ago, 3M is to pay $10.3 billion in lawsuit settlement over PFAS water contamination. That speaks volumes. They also admit to knowing the dangers for decades, but continued production, as you point out, for profit. And then these chemical companies and fossil fuel industries are blamed for contamination. They're contributing factors, and now even the EPA is warning of even tiny amounts. So actually, what they're saying, scientists are suggesting that they're just like heavy metals, things like arsenic and mercury. There's healthy levels in the body is zero, right? We want
Yeah.
zero in our body, and so I find that to be shocking, especially given the health implications. But at least it's becoming more and more. We're doing what we can do to get the word out, but it's becoming more and more understood. US, in the military in the US, over 700 sites contaminated by PFAS laden firefighting foam. Full circle to your point just now
Yeah.
about how firefighters are using this stuff.
There's a base in North Carolina where there was this um, elevated numbers of Parkinson's in the veterans, right? So it was taken up as a coincidence at first, and then it got researched. And by the way, the US military has one of the best medical databases in the world. They track it, that it's full of data, full of massive numbers, right? So there's a lot to learn. It's just not spoken of, right? So you have to dig in, but there's a ton of data there. And so when they dug into this base and they went into the water supply, they found forever chemicals, right? There's something called, I believe it's called TCE. It's a forever chemical that again is used in industry, comes back into the reservoirs and into the ground and stays there. And so you had a 30% elevation in Parkinson's over the average veteran. Coincidentally, that number 30%, this same forever chemical is present in 30% of American tap water, right? Which was not true a decade ago.
Right.
There was that accumulative buildup over that use, that industrial use, when you again have a forever chemical that doesn't break down. It's now you have a 1 in 3 chance of drinking, depending what city you're in, a forever chemical in your tap water.
Right. And that's it right there again. To drive this message home, it's the indestructibility or nearly indestructibility of this chemical bond. So this is really where it ends up being this, quick chemistry 101. PFASs are these compounds that have this carbon fluorine bond, one of the strongest on the chemical, table, the chemistry table, which is basically so stable that it's almost impossible to break, other than what the body miraculously is able to do under the right circumstances. And by the way, I don't know if you knew this. It took me a little bit of research to find this out, but extreme conditions like lightning naturally breaks these bonds, but very little other things. Lightning, imagine lightning. No one wants to get struck by lightning. But they're called forever because they don't break down the environment or the human body very easily at all, and they persist for decades, which means bioaccumulation. That's the idea here. And of course, and so a lot of us do walk around with suboptimal genetic ability to break this stuff down, right? So there's that genetic element that's on top of the already difficult for the average human, let alone sort of an optimal detoxifier, right? But before we get into some of those solutions, and some of those variations in genetics, maybe what we do is we kind of walk through maybe room to room almost to discuss contamination. The Environmental Working Group puts an incredible healthy home guide together. Encourage everyone to take a look at that, which highlights the presence of PFASs in everyday items. You wouldn't believe it. We talked about the pan. That's just tip of the iceberg. Where else are we finding this stuff?
So let's start. One main room of the home, the kitchen, right? Everyone's in there all the time. Yes, the frying pan. You have these conveniences, which are we don't want to clean, right? We don't want to spend time on dishes, etc. And so we buy into conveniences, assuming that the conveniences are safe because of where you get them from. But where you get something from is no longer evidence of safety, as we keep finding in all of what we deal with. For example, you have the black plastics that make up your spatulas and your spoons and things that were very commonly used. And the selling point is it's a plastic that doesn't melt. I can use it in my pot, etc. But it is constantly leaching forever chemicals into your food, right? Same thing with your dishwasher, the convenience of I don't have time, right? I'm going to use dishwasher and I'm going to add a puck of some sort of detergent or a dollop of some sort of liquid detergent, which, by the way, has these sorts of chemicals in them, right? That are now on your dishes that your children eat off of. And so we can keep going around the kitchen, but another area where we found these is in parchment paper,
Right.
right? So you have something that was seemingly safe, but the non-stick coating on parchment paper has forever chemicals in it, right? And again, all you would think, why is this allowed? How's this even like these things when they're studied unique and individual are deemed safe, which is not practical because that's not how you consume them. You're consuming everything all at once.
Right.
You're in a home with other things. We haven't even been to the other rooms yet, right? Aluminum foil, you're leaching the nature of how aluminum foil is now manufactured is not what it used to be. And so put your food in it, heat it up, and you're leaching those metals back in along with the forever chemicals that were used to process and get it into that state.
So exactly. So just to that end, to get it to that state, what are we trying to achieve? What's industry trying to achieve? What were they trying to foolishly achieve? The non-stick, so that's the Teflon, but anything that's impermeable essentially to water or to breakdown. So we got to start thinking. This is a laundry list, folks. So best way to sort of describe this, because it does extend through the kitchen and virtually every other room. We'll go through a few of them. Teflon coated pans, pots, baking sheets, but fast food wrappers as well. Speaking of food, microwave popcorn bags. It was notorious. Many of which now you'll see companies promote on the front of their bags, no PFASs. But this is in coffee cups, especially to-go coffee cups. Otherwise, the coffee, especially when it's hot, it's going to start coming right through the cup, right? So they got to coat it with this stuff, and then it's on pizza boxes. So anything that you can imagine, the product not allowing permeation of liquid through it. But then we get into like maybe the front hall or the living room, and we've got anything that's again water resistant in fabric form. We've got raincoats, right? Outdoor gear, water resistant clothing. On the way down the hall, we've got carpets and upholstery, which are all, as you already alluded to, the carpets and the vacuuming. We'll talk about technology as well. We have a lot to get to. This is probably why we'll end up with a part two. But vacuuming the carpet, which is laden with PFASs and PFOSs, to do what? Again, Scotch Guard. That's what DuPont, or not DuPont rather, but 3M went and did. Teflon was really an IP of DuPont, but all to the effort of preventing stain or water damage. And therefore, what you got to think about is anything that's kind of water resistant, waterproof, slippery when water hits it, kind of thing, right?
Yeah. And I mean, it's not like limited to you. Some people think this is a socioeconomic question, like cheap stuff is bad, but buy your fancy furniture, there's a reason why it doesn't stain and the fabric lasts so long, right? It's everywhere. It's not just in certain levels, right? And so you're buying your brand new fancy couch, comes wrapped up, you open it up, off gassing, and you're breathing in all those forever chemicals for some time. So even just a simple habit of don't open this up in your home. You get an Amazon package, open it outside, right?
Yes.
You don't
Yeah.
know what else is coming along with that box other than the device that you bought. So yeah, and in that living room, that it's the furniture itself.
Yep.
It's fire retardants that are on furniture now, which makes me go to the bedroom, and the mattress. And this is something that I learned from Bryce very early on, which is that our skin has its own biome, its own microbiome, flora, and when you sleep on a mattress that for some level of safety is meant to have fire retardants on it. There's good intentions there. But again, there's no practical consideration of what it means to sleep on a fire retardant for 8 hours, right? When it's tested as safe, it's not tested as I'm going to go breathe this in for 8 hours. On top of that, it's going to be a memory foam mattress that every time I roll over, I'm popping little air bubbles and off-gassing that too, right? So in the bedroom, this is probably the biggest threat. And we've seen children that when we go back to the day they got their eczema, it was the day that they bought their new mattress,
Yeah.
right? And sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, just speaking of kids, because you brought it up and it triggered a nerve. We talk a lot about at the DNA company, one of the best ways to avoid, the idea of toxic accumulation is the toxin itself. And this is unavoidable. It's in everything. But the best way for a female to detox is actually, sadly enough, to get pregnant. I've heard you say that before as well, by the way, because these kids. So first of all, these PFAS, ASs, these forever chemicals, they're both water and fat soluble, but they love blood flow. They love organs that are highly, vascularized. And unfortunately, that's what a baby is, a repository for forever chemicals and heavy metals. So now children, there's not a child born on the planet without a significant and often 10 times the load of the mother in their local environment. So this is tetragenic. This is causing, mutations in DNA. This is causing, predispositions to cancer, huge burden and stress to the unborn child. And then if we go over to the washroom, the walk-in, maybe out of the bedroom, we're putting on our bodies, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the things?
Especially for women, and I say this because of the personal care products. Men are using far more than ever before also. But it depends what resource you go to check, but you'll get told that women on average put somewhere between 500 to 1,500 chemicals a day on their bodies. Between all of the, soap, shampoos, creams, skin, products, all that stuff. And I know who's here is probably more awake to this stuff and maybe not using all of that, but the average person is, and so now you have, again, take for example your cosmetics. There's I think about 2,500 chemicals that are commonly used. There's 11,000, but there's 2,500 of them that are commonly used in the United States that are illegal in the EU. They don't allow them because they know what they do. All these studies like the one I was talking about earlier about breast cancer came out of the EU. Nobody in the US would dare produce that study. So having said all that, the North American cosmetics and personal care products are far more toxic than most of what you'll find in the rest of the globe, to the degree where I remember watching an interview between a senator from California who was speaking, I think it was in some sort of court type setting, to a director at the FDA. And the question was about child and female personal care products and about the nature of the forever chemicals in it and the damage that they do, and around what is the FDA's obligation, oversight, where do they create accountability? And the answer for all the questions was 000.
Yeah.
FDA doesn't intervene, right? So FDA creates guidelines around certain chemicals, but does not look at the products themselves. And so the safety that you think you have it's just not there. You can Google this video, you'll see it. The director saying that, nope, we don't look at that. Nope, we don't look at that. And if a product was deemed to cause a problem, they also don't regulate it. They also don't say, got to get it off. That takes a lot of bureaucracy to get to the point where a product is pulled off the shelf.
Right. Speaking of great videos, and there's so much, that can be found on the topic now. Thank goodness, starting to become more and more covered. But Hollywood's covered this, and in fact, by the way, I got to tell you, I think I've introduced you to these guys. A couple of my mentors on the topic back in like 2008, Rick Smith and Bruce Laurie, who wrote the book Slow Death by Rubber Duck. I mean, they were really ahead of their time. I mean, that was the BPA kind of movement. They covered all of these things, bisphenol A, triclosan, forever chemicals. What they did was they locked themselves in a condo for 2 weeks, and they did baseline blood work as to all of these different chemicals. They exposed themselves to, an abundance of canned tuna. They exposed themselves to a whole slew of personal care products, cosmetics, shampoos, that had a shaving cream, left it on their bodies, sunscreens, and so forth. Again, these forever chemicals are present as ingredients in products that are water and oil resistant, or they provide this long lasting wear. That's what people think about when they think about these forever chemicals. And they did their 2 week post blood work, not like 50 times more, not 100 times more, like 10,000 times more of these cancer and mutagenic causing chemicals found in their systems. And then dark waters. Do you ever see that? That was like that was a thriller. Anyways, based on the attorney Billet, who basically took on that lawsuit against DuPont.
Right.
And in fact, what's his name again? The Incredible Hulk. He was the main actor in that movie.
Right.
Ruffalo.
Oh, Mark Ruffalo. I wasn't sure
Ruffalo. Not Lou Ferrigno. He's old school, man. That's the original. Yeah, he's the original. The original Hulk. And then another really good one for people to look out for or look at is The Devil We Know. And that was those West Virginian, that was another fight against DuPont, but anyways, dumping toxic chemicals into the farmlands. I think you were referring to that a little bit earlier anyway. So let's stick in the washroom for a couple of seconds, because we know about this really wonderful database people can look at, right? It's a subsidiary of the Environmental Working Group called Cosmetic Database. So these waterproof mascaras, foundations, lipsticks, these are all things that you got to look at these databases. It's just Google Cosmetic Database, vetted, excellent database, which has a hierarchical sort of listing of carcinogenic, immunotoxic, and of course, toxic. And you don't want products with these forever chemicals in them. Because again, what are they doing to everyone, including women? And then Kashif, explain what is it within the genetic code and aptitude that makes one person different from another in their ability to even handle these in the first place. Not healthy for anybody, but some are more predisposed, right?
Yeah, we take for granted and believe that we are designed to detoxify, which is true, but to varying degrees. So we don't all do that job the same, which is why if 5 people walk into a factory and you may have 2 or 3 different potential outcomes. 2 people don't notice, 1 person doesn't feel right, 2 people have a migraine, right? What they were breathing in the level, how long it lingered for, and the level of inflammation it caused based on their body's ability to deal with it.
Right.
So glutathione, this master antioxidant, we know that inhalation-based toxins, what you breathe, there's specific genes that deal with that. And if you're not doing well there, which is easy to predict, you're going to be that canary in the coal mine that doesn't like to go into the cosmetic section or the perfume section because of how it makes you feel, right? And then people call you hypersensitive or exaggerating, but you're truly experiencing reality differently. And the good news here, the person who is hypersensitive that feels like I have the problem, what you have is the benefit of knowing what people are experiencing slowly.
Right.
So, but if you don't feel it, it doesn't mean it's not causing damage. It just means that you're going to get there, going to take a little longer. But the good news for the person who, it's almost like a protection that you will avoid because it affects you so much.
Yep.
And this reminds me of one thing where you'll see this in homes, and whether it's in the washroom that we were just speaking of, or the living room, where there is this complaint about variable outcomes, and it's lighting candles. Right? So now you have a candle isn't a candle anymore. A candle used to be beeswax with some essential oil and was something that was healing. Now it is an entirely synthetic stick of forever chemicals. It's laden with fragrances that we now see this new phenomenon called chemical pneumonia, where people that regularly light candles in their home are breathing in the forever chemicals as opposed to eating them or putting them on their skin. And the alveoli are getting literally fluid as if you have pneumonia from the inflammation of the forever chemicals in the candles. Right? So really what are we saying is all of your habits, right? Is the product or the thing that you're doing of its original intent and form and design, or is it a new Frankenstein version of it that's designed for profit, scalability, etc., because of how it's made?
Right.
There's nothing wrong with profit and scalability. The world needs to go around. But when you know that there's no appropriate oversight, regulatory oversight, this is not being looked at. You have to be your own oversight. A candle made with chemicals, don't be worried about overthinking it. Do overthink it, put it away, and buy
Yep.
something that's natural the way it was meant to be.
And to that end, I love to say this. You've heard me talk like this before, but if you don't have a filter, there's two I'd like to talk about quick that could pertain to the bedroom, the living room, or throughout the house, but in the kitchen. But if you don't have filters, you are the filter. Especially these individuals who have predispositions genetically through, as you mentioned, glutathionization, detox pathways, superoxide dismutase, ability to neutralize free radicals, which, by the way, because it's so persistent, these forever chemicals, it's somewhat limited ability for us to even get rid of them. It's possible, more in some than others. That's our point. But because they're so highly resistant to degradation, we have to basically figure out ways to limit exposure. And that's why I'll talk about the filters. But then, secondly, enhance our systems and our natural detox pathways to deal with the oxidative stress that they're just basically going to cause in our bodies, excessive to what we'd otherwise have. So, the body can still attempt to eliminate these chemicals through some processes, minimal breakdown through the liver, renal, kidneys. That's really key. Hopefully, we'll talk about how to enhance that function. Biliary excretion, right? So that the bile flow and binding, and then using more fiber to get rid of that. So through the feces, and then sweating, like we love to recommend to individuals have these compromised genetic detox pathways that we identify in the DNA 360 test. If they're compromised in particular, you just don't have a choice these days. You got to get yourself an infrared sauna. But what we have in this poll is a question, and it's black and white. Have you ever been tested for toxins, heavy metals, PFASs, or VOCs? 69% of folks said no, partly because I believe they don't know how or where to get tested. I would argue. But then secondly, because they don't necessarily understand what to be tested for. So hopefully we can talk about that next. I'll just say to the end of the filters, water filtration is key. As you mentioned, this is coming through our waterways. It's ubiquitous everywhere. It's cumulative. In my opinion, RO, reverse osmosis water, is the way to go. 0.0001 micron filtration. This stuff is much bigger than that. It's getting filtered out. Number two, and this is really important, people don't think about this, vacuuming your home. This stuff turns into particle matter. So again, off of like the flame retardants, the stuff that's Scotch guarded, your curtains, your carpeted floors, it's all turning to dust. Then if you take a vacuum and you go vacuum your house and it's not HEPA, high efficiency particulate matter, screening or filtration, you're just pumping it in the air, breathing it in, and then increasing the accumulation in your body. Yeah. So one of the ways is to avoid those products in the first place. The other is to get these filters. If you don't have these filters, you are the filter. Would you agree?
Yeah. We've seen that, I attend a lot of calls and meetings with functional medicine doctors that are trying to help people with really complex things from Lyme to MS to ALS type stuff. And a lot of times it comes down to you need some kind of high level air filtration in your home, because that's the one thing you can do that deals with everything else, right? It's very hard to change everything, especially even budget as a simple consideration. It's hard to change the habits of everybody else in the home, not just your own,
Yeah.
right? And so just again, moving the filtration obligation and responsibility from your body to something else. There's one in particular called Air Doctor that I think is very powerful in terms of its ability to filter, and it's portable. You can move it to different rooms. But anyways, there's plenty of great HEPA filters out there. So for sure, pass that responsibility onto a device and move it away from your body.
Right.
Yeah.
So we know we're going to lose you at the top of the hour. You're always off lecturing, educating. We appreciate all that. So you're going from one to the next. So we're not going to blame you for it. We appreciate your
Yeah.
time. But before we lose you, when I answered some questions from folks that are joining us tonight, and just before we do that, because we talked about glutathionization, detoxification, oxidative stress. How about methylation? Because this is also involved in the methylation pathway. It interrupts the methylation pathway. Tell us a little bit about what we're testing at the DNA company, how methylation is involved, and then, of course, some of the solutions preemptively, maybe even shows up in some questions, but what some of these people would do in these instances.
So methylation isn't just one thing, right? Methylation does a number of different jobs. And the one that we hear about is, conversion of nutrients, making certain nutrients into the form your body needs. But another thing that methylation does is it identifies non-water soluble toxins, will send them what's called a methyl group to that toxin, attach itself, and allow that thing to be removed. Pee it out, sweat it out, poop it out. It goes through your detox pathways, but it can't be identified as a toxin. There's so many new things we're exposed to that the receptors and the detox antioxidants, all these things that we're relying on, don't even know to look for those things. This is why you hear the dangers of the blood-brain barrier not being enough anymore, because the things that are meant to be prevented from entering the brain aren't recognized. The blood-brain barrier wasn't designed for that. Same thing with your gut lining, which is why there's so much leaky gut. So, yeah, supporting methylation isn't just the MTHFR gene, which is where people start. And the reason why you hear these single gene claims is because that's the direction pharma research wants to go. Because if you can identify a single gene, it's very easy to make a pill, which is the solution they're looking for, right? This equals that, which in mass population data works on 7 out of 10 people, good enough. As opposed to methylation is a baton pass. There's these genes that do a job, pass the baton to another gene, does a job, and then pass it. And you need to understand that whole cascade to come up with a truly personalized answer. So even just looking at one methylation gene is still not personalized health. It's still averaging things out a little bit. And so part of the work that was done in building the the report was knowing which methylation genes to look at for two things: the most efficacy, like where you're going to get the job done, but also to make it easy. Methylation is also very complicated, so we can spend hours just talking about it and not be done. But
Right.
how to make it easy where we can talk about it for minutes and know exactly what nutrients your body needs, where you get the biggest ROI. So yes, in a big way, identifying what's broken, supporting it properly, major support for all of what we're talking about tonight.
So the plan of action, the call to action is really start with your genetics, understand where your predispositions are. This is a one and done test for anyone who hasn't already had the DNA 360 done. And the message, of course, is you can't change your DNA. But the exciting thing is you can manage genetic expression. So should these methylation pathways be suboptimal or slightly dysfunctional, and or detox pathways through glutathionization and or oxidative stress, et cetera, causing you to be more susceptible to forever chemicals, you're going to want to know. This is your playbook. It's you understanding that you have to then consider further testing, working with one of our clinicians to do a deeper dive, to understand baseline. We might, use a blood level estimation. There's great labs out there. Eurofin Scientific is one that we might use, or Quest Diagnostics, LabCorp. These labs that people are starting to test for their blood levels of this stuff because it is, in fact, that concerning. You talk about it all the time, a significant rate of reduction of fertility. Infertility is skyrocketed. I think it's like at a somehow 1,000-fold in some men in some populations epidemiologically. And by the way, this forever chemical is this sort of like this grasshopper effect, right? Goes up, rain pulls it down, moves further north, goes up, pulls it down, and actually ends up eventually saturating the Arctic. So we're seeing the sad rate of infertility in the Eskimo and Inuit populations, and they don't even they're not using Teflon pans. They're not drinking our water, but sadly, our global dump is all northbound. It's northward. I think we should answer some questions because, again, we thought that it would probably end up this way. There's so much talk about. We'll have a part 2 on this inevitably, and get into it even deeper. But Marissa's asking, hey, is the stoneware cook products okay? This is a great question because there's always that alternative. I don't know about you, but I just like to use cast iron skillets. A lot of women are actually also iron deficient. If you're not, you don't use that. But what do you think? Is the stoneware a good alternative?
So I think yes, cast iron. I think stainless steel, if it's clean, don't buy the cheap stuff because it also is laden with chemicals. Buy proper stuff. And stoneware, just make sure again it doesn't have a layer of some kind of waterproofing on it, because some of them do, right? Some of them are designed for convenience, and some of them are raw stoneware. Great, you're gonna get some incredible minerals from there, and it's gonna be great. So just make sure there's no coatings on it, which is very common.
Yeah, basically look for the glaze, right? Look for
Yeah.
the glaze and that hyper, like, so they will be, less sticky. They won't stick, but and it is I agree, great alternative. But look for the free from. It has to be free from PFAS, PFOS, and all those. And then Gail's asking, sadly, I live down the river from Shamore's plant in North Carolina. The producers, yeah, PFAS, and then other than RO water filter, what else can she do? So we're talking about that, right? So
Yeah.
let's go from the filters, the water filters, reverse osmosis, that HEPA filtration in the vacuum, maybe HEPA on her house. What can she put in her body? What can she do to maybe accentuate? Well, first of all, Gail, get a DNA 360 test, please. Engage with one of our clinicians to know you're there, you're at ground zero. There's just no question this is affecting you in a tremendous way. But what else can she do?
Yeah, I agree with you that by using the DNA 360, first of all, you can identify which detox pathways may be broken that need support. That's step one. It's like, where is my body at the most risk and exposed and not dealing with everything that I'm taking in? And then fortifying that. It may be that, for example, you need some extra glutathione or some NAC because you can't handle the glutathione. So just being precise on getting the ROI and what you're going to add and not just taking a random supplement thinking that it's helping you, right? So that is a big one. I would also think that if your food is local, you got to be careful about soil. You know, where is this stuff growing? And it's sad, like local is usually best, but in your case, maybe not, right? It's the soil is probably having an issue, and this is a major challenge.
Yeah.
Uh, so in as much as we like to say regenerative farming, local, etc., you may want to think about sourcing, right, for food. But it comes back down to like Bryce said, air, water. In another thing we're finding, reverse osmosis, I agree with Bryce. Great. That is the way to get everything out. And then you mineralize to make sure you add the minerals that you also took out. The one thing to look for is, and this seems to be a big problem in a lot of American cities, is radiation, where there seems to be radiation in your water sources. And so that combination is not the best, forever chemicals plus radiation. In that case, you may want distilled water, which is that's the only way to get the radiation out.
Yeah. Excellent. And then we talk a lot about the DNA company, depending on what this was found. Again, if there's methylation that's amok or detox pathways are suboptimal, we're going to make recommendations for very specific ingredients that can essentially upregulate those systems. So once
Yeah.
again, you can't change your DNA, but you can manage and optimize genetic expression. Dirk is asking a very, very important question. So if the PFASs don't break down, they're forever. Are they essentially inert substances? And therefore, so how can they do harm to our bodies if they can't react chemically with our biology? So let's set the record straight, Dirk, if we weren't clear about this. Unfortunately, these are endocrine disruptors. Our body somehow doesn't have that ability to make the difference. The biochemistry is very similar to some other hormones, so that's why it disrupts that. There's protein binding mechanisms. It stops certain proteins from doing what they need to be doing. The biggest one that I know of, Cash, I don't know if there's some others you want to add to this list, but this stuff mimics fatty acids.
Mm.
And this is why cholesterol goes up, and this is another reason why there's that bile sequestering activity, increasing fiber. That's something else Gail and anyone else can do, soluble, insoluble, to bind bile, get it out of the body. This is why we're seeing cholesterol elevation, heart disease, heart attacks as a side effect of this. But these forever molecules, they resemble fatty acids, which allow them to basically interact, with cellular receptors that normally bind them. So these are PPARs, peroxisome proliferator activated receptors. Okay, so there you go. These receptors play huge roles in regulating metabolism, inflammation, and generally cell growth. And that's why it's teratogenic, carcinogenic. So when the PFASs bind to these receptors, they disrupt that process, and disrupt lipid metabolism, insulin resistance, cause liver damage. So there's the immune side effect, right? This list, Dirk, is super long. What else do we have? Thyroid disease, developmental delays in children, the cancer list itself, right? Chronic inflammation. And that's the methylation story. I mean, what am I missing here? I mean, it's just a long laundry list of it is action in your body. It is mimicking stuff. It is telling cells to do things that shouldn't be doing, blocking cells from doing things they should be doing, right? Do we absorb the FASs from winter jackets, hiking pants through our skin? Cash. Toilet
Yeah,
paper?
yeah, yeah. So if it's touching your skin, it takes about 20, the exact time, it takes 26 seconds for something on your skin to get into your bloodstream, right? And the bigger challenge with clothing is the athletic wear, yoga pants. And it seems almost by design, like how is this possible? But the most toxic part of female yoga pants is the actual crotch lining, which is right next to a cavity that has highly absorbent skin, where the forever chemicals get in. So it's not just what you eat, it's not just what you breathe, it's also, your clothing itself. And so you'll find a ton of articles. There's a group called Mamavation, if you want to look them up, that's been doing a lot of research on clothing. There's also Moms Across America that has been doing, so they're doing their actual testing. They take stuff to labs and they test it and they find this stuff and then they publish their own internal research about it. So I would take a look at what they're doing. But yes, there's now that you have this fast fashion phenomenon where clothes are literally built for the season and that's it. In order for that to happen, the Sheins of the world and the Old Navies of the world, where you pick up a shirt, doesn't feel like what a shirt used to feel like, and our children don't know any different, right? So yes, the processing itself, it's not the clothing, the water from the processing, the chemicals are used back in the factory, laden with forever chemicals. So keeping it simple, you don't need a brand new wardrobe every fall, summer, winter. You need high quality linens, cottons, wools that last your lifetime.
Yep. Bottom line, absorbing through the skin, the biggest organ of the body. Janice asks, there's a lot of online banter around the Environmental Working Group or the EWG not necessarily being reliable. Do you know of other sources? There's a couple I would say. I mean, I think it's about, so she's saying, are there others that you might recommend that are references to safer?
So yes, there's some talk about that, and I would say that when you grow in anything, it's very hard to stay um, sort of that strict because you have to include more people.
Yeah.
Meaning that who's here tonight is not thinking the way the average person is thinking. The average person they're at step one. They've never heard the term PFAS. So as an environmental working group gets bigger, in fairness to them, they have to be able to speak to the more and more people that are coming in, meaning there's some leniency on what they approve and what they don't. It's not as strict as it used to be, and that's true. That being said, it's far better than walking into a store blind,
Yep.
right? There is a group called EcoCert, which is a little more strict. It's a European standard. And so if you look up EcoCert, especially when it comes to personal care products, they're far more strict.
Yep.
But again, it makes it very limiting for someone who's just getting started.
I
That's
agree.
all that biohacking territory where you're going to the next level.
Yep. I
Right?
mean, I think it's gathering, news gathering or information gathering. I think doing due
Yeah.
diligence, not just depending on one source or one site. I mean, there's consumer reports. There's a neat outfit called Made Safe. That's a certification program identifying products that have these chemicals known to harm us. And then there's something, I think it's called Good Guide. I think Good Guide, or maybe they've actually gone out. I can't remember if they're still around. But there's, or no, I know what it was. The Dirty app. That's what I was thinking of. There's something
Okay.
called
Yeah.
the, the Dirty app?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's a mobile app. Anyways, you can scan barcodes and products to get information on that kind of stuff, but just look at multiple areas. But thanks for that question. And I want to take a moment to say kudos to everyone who's here tonight,
Yeah.
because to your point, they are seeking, many of which, by the way, are health seekers. They have a problem they want to solve. Others are wellness seekers looking to go from good to better. So whoever you are, maybe a blend of those two things, nothing better than a DNA 360 to serve as your guide, your personal playbook, in order to understand how diligent you need to be. We all need to be diligent on this matter, but how much more diligent do you need to be? Do you need to invest in that infrared sauna, get that HEPA filtration system, get the RO system, all of it in place? I think this is a great question too. What type of mattress material would you recommend? Do you have a favorite non-toxic?
Yeah, so organic latex, which is the rubber that's straight from the rubber tree. And there's a lot of there. So it used to be very difficult to buy an organic mattress. It's very easy now. So just be careful with one thing is there's a lot of misrepresentation where sometimes just the fabric, on the top is literally stitched as organic. They're writing it all over it, organic bamboo, for example. And then the foam inside is not. So make sure you know who you're dealing with and ask the right questions. Every ounce of that material should be organic. And the most important part is the latex inside. So it's literally rubber, but it's clean rubber from a rubber tree plant. It's usually extracted and made right there and then shipped over here. You're finding a lot more the sort of luxury grade mattresses are using a lot of animal furs and hairs,
Horsehair.
horsehair.
Isn't
Yeah.
that what isn't that what who's our famous rapper? Why am I forgetting
Drake,
his name?
yeah.
Drake. Doesn't Drake have like a $200,000 horsehair
Yeah.
bed?
That's
What?
I think it's called Spring. They're a British brand and that makes these they start I think at $25,000 and if you're making $500,000 a day and your name is Drake, then you can buy a $250,000 mattress, right? So
And there's coconut hair and there's all kinds of other things.
yeah.
But to your point, maybe also certifications. Are there certifications people need to look at?
I
Like
haven't seen that for mattresses. What I've
no,
seen is that people try and stick to their organic rubber latex because they know that people know that that's safe, right?
yeah,
And that's where you find. But there's so many brands that do it now, and there's brands that are doing it cheaper too. Like there's a company called Avocado that didn't
yep.
exist a couple years ago. That's just an online organic, easy ship straight to your home type company. Then you can buy stuff that's more complex that has grounding in it and energy beads in it and all sorts of stuff. But this stuff is easy to find now.
Yep. That's the point. It's becoming easier to find. This is a really great question. I really do appreciate the time. Obviously, you have a couple more minutes with us here, but Stephanie's asking, can you please address air fryers? I can't get my husband to get rid of ours. He's usually very supportive. I need talking points. Isn't that just another shape of a Teflon coated pan?
Literally Teflon coated, yeah. For the most part. There are now you're starting to see forever chemical free, but for the most part, they're still Teflon coated. And it's not only the Teflon, there's also the black, there's black plastics that are in there. So those are also leaching. But yeah, in general, air fryers are horrible. But there
Especially
are,
because they're high temperature as well, right? I mean, they're not burning level like smoke point temperature we see stovetop, but they're still high enough that they start to burn off these toxic fumes.
yeah, yeah. So, but the good news is there are companies starting to make clean versions now. So just dig deep.
Can't remember if it was you that was talking about this, or maybe I saw it on some other podcast I follow, but people are starting. So again, these canaries in a coal mine, right? You're that sensitive person, you're hungry, go start cooking something, but the food's not ready yet. And then you start to get this Teflon flu. And Teflon flu is when this starts heating up and they become aerosolic. You can't detoxify it effectively. And then you think, are you having a hypoglycemic event? Why are you feeling off? It's this otherwise PTFE, or which is PFAS. Look for that alternative to Teflon. It's toxic fumes being released.
Yeah.
Wonder if we can squeeze one more here before you have to go. Do you recommend other brands of cookware? Sifting through all the information. This is now Janice asking. I just need to know what to get. Cast iron, stainless steel, ceramic. My gut is my Achilles heel. Oh,
Mm,
and she's had her DNA 360. So thank you, Janice. GSTM1 null variant.
yeah. So somebody mentioned in the chat, Caraway, very clean brand. They do a good job. I think they only ship within the US, from what I understand. Um, and going back to the basics of like cast iron and stainless steel, and people are frustrated with stainless steel, and why do you get Teflon? Because it's non-stick, the convenience. Um, if you take, and here's a simple hack, if you take your stainless steel pan and you heat it on ultra high heat, the highest that your stove will go, empty, right? And you test at that point, give it a couple minutes to get really, really hot, and throw little drops of water on there. What if the water sizzles and burns and evaporates? It's not ready yet. Let it continue heating up. As soon as the water starts to bead, you can now bring it back to the desired heat and it becomes nonstick.
Right.
Literally, right? So we just need to know what we used to know that we forgot that we're trying to replace with conveniences. So you can literally convert a stainless steel pan into into stainless non-stick, sorry, just by heating it up properly.
That's you're just confirming what actually Carol, who is one of our latest questions, is confirming. So thank you.
Oh,
We know you got to go. We're going to do a part 2 on this.
yeah.
I'll stick around for a couple more minutes to tie this up for us, and we'll definitely call out for a part 2 of forever chemicals and other chemicals that might be disturbing you. Cash, really appreciate
Great.
all your genius as usual. Good luck with the next workshop, which is actually you're a minute late for.
Yeah.
All right,
All
sir.
right. See you,
We'll
everybody.
talk to
Good
you soon.
night, guys.
Cheers. So for everyone else, I will continue to read through a couple more of these questions. We'll wrap sooner than we normally do tonight, and then we'll do a part 2. So the next question here, what about porcelain pots? Marcy is asking. So similar sort of answer, I guess, to what we've been saying. As long as they are saying free from PFAS, PFOS, you're what you're looking for, and PFOA, by the way, it's another one. You're looking for, they're created basically non-porous, sort of glass-like surface. It makes them free from typically. So they don't have that leaching. They're pretty durable. I use these, pretty good heat distribution, easy to clean. If you're into it, there's the aesthetic appeal, I suppose, but they're obviously a lot heavier, just like the cast iron. That might be problematic for some people, and they're pretty pricey. But they're an excellent choice, non-toxic for the most part. And again, just look for films, look for that hyper, glaze. As long as they're handled with care, they typically don't chip or crack. We have. Is water fluoridation mandatory worldwide? And does fluoride bind more strongly than iodine to thyroid hormones and cause disease? Right. Here's a can of worms. No, it's not mandatory everywhere, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think. It's country to country. That's the jurisdiction. I believe it's even in some cases. I think it's a public health concern, and it's a measure aimed at reducing, at least initially, the thought was dental cavities. But it's come to, obviously attention of science and maybe, early adopters that, that widespread fluoridation is probably not a good idea. US, Canada, Australia, some parts of the UK have pretty extensive fluoridation programs, but a lot of European countries, Germany, Netherlands, Switzerland, Sweden, I don't know about Switzerland, actually don't fluoridate their water, and they rely on, not that I believe it should be administered in the dental office, but there, other dental health measures. So insofar as the thyroid component, fluoride and iodine are both what we call halogens. So that means that they basically belong to this sort of same group of elements in the periodic table. So because of that, they kind of interact with each other in these various biological systems. And fluoride basically does compete with iodine for absorption in the thyroid gland and can actually impair and or affect thyroid production. So that's a whole story. It doesn't bind directly to thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, in the same way that iodine does. You need tyrosine, the amino acid, plus iodine to make T3. T4 to convert to T3. but it disrupts the normal use of iodine by the thyroid gland. So that's the quick and dirty of it. I think there's an iodine dietary deficiency consideration, certainly in areas where this used to be historically the Great Lakes, the Great Lake phenomenon. So iodine was low. You didn't get it from sea water or salt. Not seawater. No one's drinking ocean water. Salt from the sea. So in areas where that deficiency is common, the introduction of fluoride without addressing iodine probably exacerbated the thyroid issues, which was hypothyroidism, which was non-autoimmune, which was goiter, a large expression of the thyroid in the neck. Anyways, I might be taking that one too far. How do we trust labels that say that PFSA, BPA, et cetera, free when no one's testing the products? Well, yeah. So Dolores, you're asking a good question. Sorry, that was actually not Dolores. I missed who that was. But I think we need to look for third-party certifications. We can't trust everything, but there's, for like there's a global organic textile standard or something like that, third party for purchase of housewares anyway. You want to do some due diligence here. Regulatory oversight is minimal in some regions, like the USDA, U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, or even parties in Europe. They have enforced standards that require manufacturers to list claims like BPA free or PFSA free, but enforcement varies. So yeah, it is still buyer beware. But if you're questioning whether something has it or not, I think the answer would be to sort of stay away from that. Go to the most natural possible thing, not human made, from nature, if possible. Manufacturers should have transparency, traceability. So call them on that before buying a product. Most of these companies, I think, that are in the sales of high quality products will have a chat bot answering, or not bot, person answering to some questions. You can try that. Typically have reputations. But free from doesn't always mean safe. What they did with BPA was just to produce other plastics that have variations, in some cases even more harmful versions of bisphenol A. The BPS, right? Anyway, I would say just continue to do due diligence and ask questions, because trusting labels that claim products are totally free from is challenging. So look for those third-party certifications and try to choose reputable brands. Dolores says, plastic bottles in particular, olive oil. Does the olive oil absorb chemicals even more efficiently? Yeah. Those that are oil soluble, which PFAS is. So correction, does the olive oil absorb more efficiently? Yes. So yes, the olive oil absorbs plastics and plasticizers from the bottle, especially when there's oxygen and light. So a couple of rules around extra virgin olive oil. It's got to be extra virgin, true olive oil. And that's a whole other show, a whole other way. But you want it in a very dark glass container. You want it to, not be exposed to air. And you, of course, want to taste a very peppery note, and that it's dark green. That's a healthy olive oil. And we're almost at the end here, I think. We've got, can you go over MTR and whether to use methyl B12 or not? Yeah, so in the methylation pathway, there are variations, so Kashif earlier was describing this as, I like this analogy best as a relay race where the baton is a methyl group. And the idea is to make that baton, let's call it stickier or more passable from one racer in the relay race to the other, where we're looking at 4 and kind of a 5th racer, but MTHFR, SHMT1, MTR, and MTRR. When there are issues, particularly around MTR or suboptimal variants in MTR, and in particular SHMT1, there's a call out to use downstream non-methylated versions of B12 or folic acid. So rather than methylation, substrates like methyl tetrahydrofolate, 5-MTHFR, quadrahydrofolate, or in the case of B12, methyl cobalamin, we'd want to use their end metabolites. So adenozylcobalamin in the case where you've got the suboptimal MTR, or folinic acid when we're talking about the suboptimal variation of your SHMT1. So I hope that helps. And last question, and then we'll wrap. Janice is asking, is there a water purification system that you would recommend? I'm sensitive to pH water filtration. Brita makes, yes, less acidic. You know, it's interesting with this acid-base concept. There's some literature around forever chemicals being excreted better because they're highly water soluble through kidney clearance and sweat, even more than liver. Okay. So they're both fat and water soluble. So we want to really get them out of our sweat and urine. So water, drinking pure water to avoid the exposure is key, but also drinking the right water so that you flush it efficiently is key. So the idea here is pH actually also plays a role. So best way to manage pH is to, I think that there's sort of an over accentuation around things like apple cider vinegar and greens. I think there is some real science to what's called PRAL, or the potential of renal acid load, and the assignment of various foods given their acid base assignments. So lemon, very highly acidic when you touch a pH paper to it, but you drink lemon water and that actually converts into it creates more of an alkalinity in your system. And I'm saying this because it's some good evidence to show when you're well hydrated and sort of shifted slightly systemically to alkaline, you're going to rid yourself of these forever chemicals more efficiently, especially when you've got these genetic susceptibilities that are suboptimal for detoxification. So my answer to that question is RO water that you might want to realkalize. And there's, trace minerals that you can purchase, where you can take a trace mineral at the same time. Understand something with RO water. It's getting rid of everything up to 0.0001 microns, but, and this is a big but, you're removing mostly inorganic micronutrients, inorganic minerals. Your body doesn't use them in the first place. In order to achieve a daily recommended allotment, or even optimal for that matter, you'd have to consume the equivalent of approximately 18 Olympic-sized swimming pools. No one's doing that, obviously. So you don't get your organic minerals from water anyway. When you RO water, you do sort of change it slightly acidic. So remineralizing it, taking a mineral, making sure you're taking a multi-mineral, that's the solution. But the most important thing is getting it out, getting the RO water in by taking out all of the forever chemicals, dioxins, furans, heavy metals. The list is very long. Anyway, I appreciate everyone's time this evening. We'll look forward to doing a part 2 on this. And once again, if you haven't had your DNA 360 test done, get it done, understand your predispositions, consult with one of our clinicians to help you interpret through it, get you on a plan for life, and actionable, very remedial types of protocols, such as managing these forever chemicals. Thanks so much, everybody. Stay well. Have a great night.